All right, implementation plan has been set for part 6. Logan, Visual Studio Express, sir.
All right, switching back over to the project, let us take a look at the player. We need to implement 2 methods inside of the player, the first of which is going to be reset. So here is our reset method, and we need to do a few things. The first thing we need to do in reset is to center the player in the center of the screen. So this will be a simple setting of the position. We'll use this dot position, and we'll set that to a vector2 centered on the screen. So I'm going to have to make a new vector2 so I can take into account the screen width and height. So position will be equal to a new vector2 where we take in the game 1's screen width. So game 1, if you remember, screen width was available as, I believe, an internal, so basically public as far as we're concerned. Now, of course, I wanted to divide this by 2, since screen width would be the right-hand side of the screen, and half of that would be centered. And then the same for y, so game 1 dot screen height divided by 2. We're already center origin based for every actor, so we don't have any further offsets.
Exactly.
And that's it. That will leave us centered on the screen.
All right.
Now the next thing we need to do is to record the invincibility time. We are being told here through this parameter what the desired invincibility time is, but we need to save that into our local field here so that we know how to start chipping away at that and for how long we have left to be invincible. So let us record that into the field with this dot invincibility time being equal to the given invincibility time parameter. All right.
And the final thing was getting that flicker set to true so that we begin flickering.
Right, since a reset always invokes invincibility, we want to turn on the flicker ability of this actor so that it begins flickering until it goes uninvincible. So this dot flicker, let's see, we have, we need to begin this, grabbing the property, so we set that to true in order to turn it on, and this will begin flickering until flicker is set to false.
Okay, and that pretty much wraps up reset. So we can go ahead and put this into play over in update now, where we're going to check to see if we're currently invincible.
All right, so here, up here in update, where we've already overridden the method, the first thing we want to check is to say if this dot is invincible. If we are invincible, then we need to start chipping away at invincibility time to eventually run out and then stop being invincible.
That's right. And if you recall, remember, is invincible property simply returns if invincibility time is greater than 0. And, well, since we just set it, then that means we are invincible.
All right, so inside of here, the very first thing we will do is to chip away at invincibility time and decrement that by how much time has passed.
And what he's talking about is how much time has passed since the last update. So each update will continue to chip away at invincibility time.
Right. So we're going to decrement by, and I'm going to cast a float here because the game time is given in double. And that will be game time dot elapsed game time dot total seconds.
So since we're doing the 60 frames a second, that basically is going to give us the 0.01666667. All right, cool. So now we're going to turn right back around and we're going to check to see if we're still invincible.
Right, because invincible is, of course, based on invincibility time. If this decrement took us below 0, or actually equal to or below 0,
then we need to go ahead and we need to turn off that flicker.
Right. So we will check again to say if this dot is, actually hit the wrong thing, this dot is invincible. Now I want to check if this has just been turned off, so I'm actually going to do a if not is invincible. If that's the case, we need to turn the flicker off. So this dot flicker will be set to false.
And that's it.
And that's really all there is to it.
Okay, so now what we need to do is go ahead and go to the actor class.
All right, jumping over to actor. Before I do, let me build.
Sounds like a good idea.
Any errors.
And all is nice. All right, in the actor class, we need to get that check collision going.
All right, so down here in check collision, I'm going to wipe out the temporary return so we can put the real implementation into place. The first thing of that implementation was to get the distance between actor A and actor B. So let's set that up. I'm going to store the distance in a float called distance, and that is going to be set to the result of vector2 dot distance, where that's going to take in the actor's position. So that would be actor A dot position and actor B dot position, and that will return a float that represents the distance between the two actors. The next thing we need to check is, with that distance, is that distance small enough to be considered a collision between the two actors? And we're going to do this directly as the return instead of another if. since we can do the expression in form that will return a Boolean. So let's return distance less than actor A dot radius plus actor B dot radius. If the distance is less than these two actors' radii combined, then the two actors have visually overlapped or collided, and that causes a true collision. Otherwise, if the distance was too great, there isn't a collision.
Okay. So the final thing we need to do is go ahead and turn our attention to the game class.
Alright, so jumping over to game, I believe the first thing there was a constant to define, since we need something to tell us what the player's invincibility time is going to be.
Right.
I'm going to put this constant in to the player section because it is player relevant. So I'm going to jump right below our speed constants and add a new one. This is going to be a float, and it is called player invincibility time. So player invincibility time. And invincibility time is going to be set to 1. 1 second of invincibility time upon spawn.
Okay. So all that's left now is, well, checking for a collision.
Alright, and that will be done inside of update. So scrolling down until we find the update method, here we are.
Now this is great because you got to ask yourself, where exactly in here do you want to check for this collision? Well, think about it. First of all, we've got a switch case structure set up for handling the game state that we're in. So we're not going to check for collisions if we're at a title screen or if we've just done a level change. Obviously, we're going to do it if we're in the middle of playing the game. But when we're playing the game, we have this large list of actors. So at what point do we want to do a check? Well, let's think about this. If we were to do it, if the actor that came up with us was a player, then we would have to cycle through the entire list again looking for each enemy. Okay? We don't want to have to do that because if we know we have an enemy, we can always quickly get to the player because we hold our own external reference to the player, and that keeps us from having to go back through the list looking again.
Exactly. If we're inside of player here, we would have to do an additional lookup to find possible enemies.
Yeah, that's not efficient.
And we're already looking through all actors by using this loop. So what we could do is wait until we find an enemy because we always have the player field.
Exactly.
That was the point of putting the player field in, is if we happen to be looking at an enemy, we don't have to look up the player. It's already assigned. It's already remembered.
That's right.
So what I'm going to do is jump below the if statement that was looking for the player, and I'm going to set up an if block to look for an enemy. Now, I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I did with player, since with player, all I did was an is check, because everything I was doing could be done directly to an actor. With some of this enemy stuff, I'm going to need an enemy reference. So I'm going to need to cast...
Because you're going to be doing some very specific stuff, such as is harmful.
Right, I'm going to have to look at this guy as an enemy.
That's right.
So I'm going to need an enemy reference. And instead of casting directly, I might as well just cast using the as operator, because that would tell me everything I need to know, since I can do a check for null. Null will be my new is check, and if that happened to be false, so if it was not null, then I've got my enemy.
There you go.
So the way I'm going to do this is to define an enemy variable. So we'll call this variable enemy, and I'll set it equal to the given actor, the current actor that we're looking at, casted as enemy. If this cast succeeded, and I'm going to declare success as being not null, so if enemy was not equal to null, then the actor we were looking at was in fact an enemy. And everything inside of here can deal with this enemy variable. Now, if it was an enemy, I'm going to build up this check in a few different things, because you jotted down two conditions which we have to look for is invincible on the player and is harmful on the enemy, because both of those will kind of negate the whole collision thing.
That's right.
But I'm going to put those in last and just get the collision set at first, because that's the first thing that comes to mind. It's like if we're hitting an enemy, do a collision check with the player. So that collision check will be done using the actor's check collision method. So we're going to say if actor dot check collision. And we're checking the collision between the enemy and the player. So for the two actors, I can feed it enemy, the enemy we're currently looking at, and the player, which I'm going to give as this dot player, just to remember that this is a field and this is the local variable. So if that's the case, if they did in fact collide, then we're going to call this the death scenario because we hit an enemy. And to represent that, we change the game state. So this dot game state is going to be set to game state dot died. And there we go. I believe it should be checkable at this point. Let me close off one of these parentheses.
Okay.
So yeah, let me build, and we'll try this out. We should have some enemies on the screen. So if I move into and collide with one of those...
And there you go.
So check it out. The game is frozen, but if you think about that, what has happened? Well, we've changed to died. What happens in the died state? Nothing. We don't update actors anymore, and that's why the game freezes.
That's right.
But that does mean we must be hitting this line if we actually got here.
So could we, at the moment, just wire in like button B or something to call reset?
Let me think. If we're inside of died, what we could do, let's see if I've done any button checks up to this point. We could. I was just looking to see if there was one I could steal. As a matter of fact, there kind of is. I'm going to steal this line.
Okay.
No, on second thought, I'll type it out. No, it doesn't look like I'm cheating as badly.
Okay.
But if you want to set it up so that we can go back... So you're saying we want to go back from died over to playing, maybe attempt...
Yeah, just a quick... Because that'll allow us to test the whole flicker, invincibility, and reset.
And we can test a lot faster since we don't have to relaunch the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, instead of died, I'm going to put in what we're going to call a temp reset. So if we're in died, let's do a check and see if the B button's pressed. So if the gamepad state... So gamepad... state dot, and that's, I was looking for the reference thing, so there's buttons, there's B. If the B button is button state dot pressed, then let's perform some debug reset. So the first thing I want to do is set this dot game state equal to game state dot playing, so we just go back to playing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, we need to reset because if we just did this, we'd still be stuck.
That's
Matter of
right.
fact, let me run it and see if I can show that.
Okay.
We're going to be stuck because we've collided.
Dead.
So
Dead. Hang on, it's coming though. Keep going. Keep. And we're good again. And we're dead again. Oh man.
So, well, that would be an opportune time to check the reset
That's
functionality.
right.
So after we set the game state, let's also take the player and tell it to reset.
By the way, we're also seeing that our states are working wonderfully.
Right, because we've now been using
We're coding in the
state.
died state.
We've also proven that we are, in fact, in the died state, because before, any of these states would have made the game freeze.
That's right.
But we've identified that this B button code is working, so we are, in fact, in the died state upon death. But once we get to die and reset, let us feed in the player invincibility time that we had defined above, and let's see how this is working. So, looking for an enemy, and let's hit that one.
And reset.
So, reset. And he's close enough to the center of the screen, so I don't have to reset a few times. But there we go. I had some of the flicker code. If I jump to a farther enemy now, reset back to the center, and things continue.
So we did indeed see the flicker code working.
But you'll notice that the flicker code does not actually make us invincible.
That's right. So we need to fix that.
All right, and that goes back to the considerations for dying, and that it's not just a collision check. It's a few different things.
That's right.
So first of which is now the apparently obvious, is player invincible? So I'm going to do a check and say, if the player is not invincible, then he's susceptible to dying. So if not, player dot is invincible, and some additional check, then we'll do the check collision. And we could go ahead and throw in...
that is harmful for the enemy, because an enemy needs to be harmful.
Right. I'm deciding if we should show that or just take it for granted. Because, I mean, I could show the enemy scaling up. I'd have to set the enemy scale to very slow. Let me do that.
Okay, that's
It'll
fine.
only take a second.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is switch to enemy. And remember, we had enemy scale time as a constant defined at the top. I'm going to set that to 5 seconds, so it takes a long time. And let me also do another thing. Let me set the player invincible, or the player's reset, as soon as we create the player. Because I noticed that we're still spawning the player in the top left corner of the screen. If you remember back in Load Graphics content where we make the player, I could turn around and say this.player.reset. So upon being created, it resets. Now we'll spawn in the middle of the screen, and we'll spawn with invincibility.
And be flickering. Perfect.
So let's try this out. Let me scroll back down to update. Alright, could have just run, but there we go. So we're... no method for reset. Oh, okay, hang on. Shouldn't have jumped away from that just yet, because over in Load Graphics Content I have not yet fed it the required player invincibility time. But if we feed that in now, we're invincible, and everything is spawning. Let me do one more thing. I was afraid of that. The player invincibility time goes away so quickly that we don't have much time to test. I'm going to change this up to 100 seconds. So now we're invincible for as long as we want, but there's some enemies that should not be harmful yet. And did we put the check in? Oh, wait, yeah.
Yeah, we're invincible.
Oh, okay, I was looking at it the wrong way. So let's go not invincible. There we go. And died. Died again. So we want to make it to where scaling enemies aren't harmful yet.
Right.
Just wanted to point that out so that we know that we do in fact.
Yeah, because there's two things that need to take place here. You don't need to be invincible, and the enemies, they need to be harmful, and then we can actually die if we contact one.
So let's plug that in now. So we have to be not invincible, and this given enemy has to be harmful.
That's right.
So is no player invincibility, and enemy is harmful, and
we've collided.
This collision check comes out true, then we need to kill the player. So with all these combined now, I've lost my invincibility, and all of these enemies are not harmful, and I can happily fly over.
And now they are.
So as they start to move, then they become harmful.
Okay.
So that has all the considerations in place. Let me very quickly go back and correct the enemy scale time back to its correct half a second time, and there we go. So we run out of that and can die, and then we can reset and die and run through.
And you ran through one, and almost ran all the way through another one.
But that is indeed working.
Okay, beautiful. And that is everything that we wanted to get in place by the end of Part 6. So we have followed our implementation plan, and we now have player-enemy interaction. So that is going to wrap up this section. Thanks a lot.